The world of Las Vegas in the mid-20th century was dazzling, loud, and full of life. Bright lights glimmered from every casino, the air smelled of perfume and smoke, and the sound of applause echoed late into the night. In this glittering world, two men were stars among stars. They were seen together everywhere, on stage, in photographs, at parties, always smiling, always charming. But behind the public smiles, their lives were more complicated than anyone could imagine. Frank Sinatra was the planner, the thinker. He noticed details that most people missed. Every handshake, every glance, every decision mattered to him. He understood the hidden pressures of fame, the pitfalls that could come from trusting the wrong person or ignoring the right advice. Dean Martin, on the other hand, seemed untouchable. He moved through life effortlessly, always charming, always easygoing. He had a smile that could melt an audience, a voice that could calm a room, and a way of making every problem seem smaller than it really was. It was easy to believe that Martin could never fail. He seemed fearless, untouchable, and in control. The audience, the fans, the world outside, all saw him as a carefree star who could do no wrong. But the truth was different. Behind the laughter and applause, there were moments that were tense, moments that carried the weight of unspoken warnings. Sinatra noticed these moments. He saw risks that Martin didn't seem to see. He understood that fame could be dangerous, and that ignoring even small warnings could create consequences far greater than anyone expected. No one outside their circle knew the tension that sometimes simmered just below the surface. The world only saw two friends, laughing together, enjoying the spotlight. But in private, the dynamics were more fragile. A glance in the dressing room, a quiet word in the hallway, or a subtle change in behavior could signal something important. Sinatra was careful, always watching, always calculating. Martin, full of charm and ease, often laughed off concerns, never seeing the danger lurking behind them. It was in this mix of light and shadow, applause and quiet tension that the story begins. The public thought they knew the story of these two friends, but the truth was more complicated. There was a warning, a caution, given in private, and the way that warning was handled would quietly shape the lives of both men. The audience might assume it was harmless, just another backstage conversation. But in reality, ignoring this warning set the stage for events that would test their friendship and reveal hidden cracks in even the strongest of bonds. Even the smallest gestures mattered. A pause, a glance, a whispered caution, each had significance, and yet the carefree nature of Martin made it easy to dismiss them. The tension was subtle at first, almost invisible, but it grew slowly, like a shadow stretching over a bright room. By the time the audience would later see its effects, it would be too late to stop the consequences. The first act sets the stage. Two iconic men, both beloved and admired, moving through a glamorous world that hides dangers behind the sparkle. One is careful, protective, and aware. The other seems untouchable, confident, and unconcerned. The stage is set for a warning, a choice, and a consequence that will slowly unfold in ways no one expected. Away from the lights, cameras, and applause, the differences between these two men became more obvious. Sinatra was deliberate in everything he did. He thought carefully about his words, his actions, and his decisions. He understood that fame could be fleeting and that a single misstep could change everything. Martin, however, moved like the wind, free, charming, and untethered. To anyone watching, it seemed like nothing could touch him. But appearances can be deceiving. While the world saw a carefree, confident entertainer, there was a private reality that very few understood. Every choice Martin made, every decision ignored, carried consequences he didn't see. The backstage world was full of pressures, rivalries, and hidden risks. Small mistakes that seemed harmless in the moment could accumulate quietly, shaping outcomes in ways no one could predict. No one realized what this meant at the time. Fans only saw the public persona, the laughter, the music, the charm. But backstage, in quiet moments, Sinatra noticed things that Martin did not. A conversation that seemed casual, a decision that seemed small, or even a trusted friend who was not entirely loyal. All of these carried potential danger. Sinatra saw the risk and gave his warning, a word of caution meant to protect Martin. The warning was simple but important. It wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't meant for the world to hear. It was private, almost invisible, but it carried weight. Martin, in his carefree way, laughed it off. He didn't see the danger in the same way Sinatra did. Charm and talent can make someone feel untouchable, but ignoring advice from someone who has seen the storms before can lead to consequences that arrive quietly, almost unnoticed at first. Even the most loyal friends can misunderstand each other. Sinatra's concern was real, but Martin didn't fully grasp it. And in that misunderstanding, the tension between appearances and reality grew. The audience would later see that these small, private moments mattered more than anyone could have guessed. What seemed harmless at first had the power to shape the paths of both men in ways that would be revealed only slowly, over time. The backstage world was full of contrast: laughter and worry, confidence and caution, public admiration and private concern. These contrasts created a slow, simmering tension that would eventually lead to a dramatic turning point. The carefree charm that defined Martin publicly could not fully protect him from the subtle dangers lurking just out of sight. And the careful observation of Sinatra, though unnoticed by most, would prove crucial as events began to unfold. The second act deepens the story. It shows that beneath fame and friendship, the private choices, warnings, and overlooked moments carry meaning. It hints at consequences without revealing them and sets up the slow, inevitable tension that will reach its turning point in the next act. The audience now understands that charm, talent, and friendship are not enough to prevent unseen challenges from emerging. The backstage room was quiet, a stark contrast to the roaring applause and bright lights outside. It was here, away from cameras and fans, that Sinatra finally gave Martin a warning, one that was subtle but heavy with meaning. It wasn't shouted or dramatic. It came as a careful word, a glance, a reminder that the choices Martin was making might carry consequences far beyond what he imagined. Martin, as always, smiled. His charm made the caution seem lighter than it was. He laughed it off, brushed it aside, and returned to the carefree persona the world loved. To the audience, nothing seemed unusual. The laughter continued, the applause kept coming, and Martin's confidence remained unshaken. But underneath the surface, tension was already beginning to build. The warning had been given, and ignoring it was the first step down a path that neither of them fully understood. No one realized the full importance of that moment at the time. Fans saw only the public image: two friends, laughing together, sharing the stage, inseparable. But private life told a different story. Small choices that Martin ignored, small signs that he dismissed, were quietly stacking up. Every handshake, every casual decision, every trusting smile became a tiny domino in a chain that would grow longer and heavier with each passing day. Even a single ignored word can carry unseen weight. Sinatra, who had seen the highs and lows of fame, knew what could happen when warnings were ignored. He tried to hint at the risks, subtle suggestions, half conversations, and careful advice, but they were swallowed up by Martin's carefree charm. It wasn't arrogance exactly. It was confidence, mixed with the sense that charm and popularity could make someone untouchable. But that wasn't the real problem. The danger was quiet, invisible, and slow building. No dramatic scandal marked the moment. Instead, it was the small, almost invisible shifts, decisions made without thinking, trust placed in the wrong hands, opportunities mishandled. These small moments, unnoticed by the public, were the real cracks forming in what everyone assumed was a flawless life. The warning also carried emotional weight for Sinatra. It wasn't just about advice. It was about concern for a friend, loyalty, and the knowledge that one wrong choice could affect both their lives. His eyes, his tone, his careful attention to detail hinted at the seriousness of the moment. And even though Martin didn't take it as seriously as he should, the audience begins to feel the tension building, the quiet anticipation of consequences yet to come. What seemed like a simple word of caution would quietly change everything, even if no one noticed at the time. By the end of this act, the audience understands that a warning has been ignored, that the carefree public image hides private tension, and that the story is moving toward its inevitable turning point. It is a slow, simmering tension that promises drama without revealing the full scope. Life carried on as usual on the surface. Martin performed, laughed, and charmed audiences, while Sinatra remained watchful, cautious, and quietly worried. To anyone observing from the outside, everything appeared normal. The shows continued, the Las Vegas lights shone bright, and the world saw only two friends at the top of their game. But behind the stage, the ignored warning began to ripple through Martin's life. Small mistakes appeared, choices made casually that would later have larger consequences. A deal that wasn't properly handled, a trusting smile given to the wrong person, a conversation dismissed too lightly. Each of these small acts added to a growing tension. The danger was subtle and almost invisible, but it was there, building slowly, methodically. No one outside the private circle could see it. Even some close friends only sensed a faint change, a quiet worry in Sinatra's eyes, a subtle pause in Martin's charm. The audience begins to realize that charm and fame could not protect someone from the slow accumulation of small risks. These private struggles were invisible to fans, but they were real, affecting decisions, friendships, and trust in ways that would soon become impossible to ignore. What made it even more complicated was the contrast between public and private life. On stage, Martin seemed untouchable. He smiled, sang, and entertained without a care. Off stage, though, the choices he made or failed to make created tiny cracks that threatened to grow larger. Sinatra's concern became heavier with each passing day. The audience begins to sense the irony. The carefree star who seemed untouchable in public was quietly vulnerable in private. This act also emphasizes the emotional tension. Sinatra's frustration and worry, Martin's confidence and charm, the backstage decisions, and the slow buildup of consequences all combine to create a sense of dread without any dramatic event. It's a quiet, simmering pressure that builds slowly, making the audience anxious for what will come next. Even those closest to him couldn't fully see what was quietly falling into place. By the end of this section, the audience feels the slow escalation of tension, the invisible consequences of ignored warnings, and the emotional stakes for both men. The groundwork is laid for the midpoint twist, where the unseen dangers will finally reveal themselves and change the audience's understanding of what was happening all along. By this point, the backstage tension had been simmering quietly for months. The audience had seen the contrast between Martin's carefree charm and Sinatra's careful watchfulness, and the subtle warning that had been ignored lingered in the background. Then came the moment that changed everything, not with drama or public scandal, but quietly, almost invisibly, leaving a mark that neither man could erase. It was revealed that Martin had unknowingly been betrayed by someone he trusted deeply. This person, someone who seemed loyal and harmless, had taken advantage of Martin's carefree nature, manipulating a critical decision that affected his career and reputation. The consequences weren't immediate or loud, but they were real. Contracts were mismanaged, opportunities were lost, and whispers began circulating that subtly undermined the star's standing. For Sinatra, who had warned him privately, the moment was devastating proof that ignoring a simple warning could carry serious consequences. What made this revelation shocking was its quiet subtlety. There was no public feud, no dramatic headline, no scandal for the newspapers. Instead, it was a private betrayal that slowly altered the trajectory of both men's lives. The carefree persona that everyone admired now looked fragile in retrospect. The audience, who had assumed that Martin's charm and talent could protect him from anything, now realized that even the most untouchable star could be vulnerable in unseen ways. No one saw it coming, but the choices made in those quiet moments would ripple farther than anyone imagined. This twist also creates an emotional jolt. The audience feels sadness for Martin, who unknowingly trusted the wrong person, and tension for Sinatra, who foresaw the danger but could not prevent it. There's a bitter irony in the situation. The very personality that made Martin beloved, his charm and confidence, also made him blind to the threat. The midpoint raises a new question for the viewer. Did Martin ever realize what had happened? Was he fully aware of the betrayal, or would he remain in ignorance like most of the world around him? The slow buildup of consequences begins here, turning the story from quiet tension into an emotional drama that will ripple through the remainder of the narrative. The visual hint could be a faded photo of Martin with the betrayer, slightly blurred, or a close-up of an old letter with partial sentences visible. These subtle images suggest secrets and loss without explicitly showing them. By the end of this act, the audience is fully invested. They understand that the stakes are real, that warnings can be ignored at great cost, and that charm and fame are not shields against subtle betrayal. The stage is set for the next section, where the ripple effects of this private shock begin to play out. After the betrayal is revealed, the consequences slowly start to show. The world still sees Martin as carefree and untouchable. On stage, he sings, laughs, and charms audiences just as he always has. But backstage, things are changing. Deals are affected, trust is broken, and small mistakes begin to accumulate into larger problems. Every decision he makes now carries weight, even if he doesn't fully realize it. Sinatra watches closely, aware that the subtle damage could grow beyond what anyone could control. Each backstage conversation, each misjudged decision, and each reliance on the wrong people adds pressure. What once seemed harmless now starts to take shape as a real threat. The audience begins to see how fragile private lives can be, no matter how glamorous the public appearance. No one outside the inner circle sees what's happening. Fans still admire the performances, believing the stars are untouchable. But in private, the tension is real. Friends whisper warnings that are ignored, minor errors accumulate, and moments that should have been small become turning points. The slow burn continues, letting the audience feel the weight of inevitability without revealing the final outcome. Even the brightest lights can hide shadows that quietly grow, and sometimes charm is not enough to protect against what's coming. This act also deepens the emotional stakes. Martin's carefree life now carries undercurrents of anxiety and vulnerability, even if it isn't visible to the public. Sinatra's role as a cautious observer grows heavier, as he sees consequences unfolding that could have been avoided. There is irony in watching a star so beloved and admired quietly struggle, while everyone around him still applauds. The escalation is slow and methodical, emphasizing that the impact of ignored warnings and hidden betrayals doesn't always arrive all at once. It grows, subtly, in private spaces, in conversations few people witness, in decisions that appear minor but shape the course of events. The audience begins to understand the hidden consequences of trust, charisma, and unheeded advice. The visuals for this section could include backstage photos, empty dressing rooms, blurred letters, or slow zooms on vintage contracts. Music should emphasize tension without overwhelming, keeping the story emotional yet subtle. By the end of Act 6, the audience is fully aware that something serious is unfolding behind the scenes. The slow escalation of consequences has been shown, the emotional weight is felt, and the stage is perfectly set for the next act, where the full scope of the fallout will start to emerge. By this point, the backstage world that once seemed full of laughter and charm had begun to show cracks. The consequences of ignoring Sinatra's warning and the quiet betrayal Martin experienced were now growing harder to ignore. Though the public still saw the carefree, charismatic star performing effortlessly on stage, the private reality was very different. Decisions that once seemed minor now carried weight, and the small mistakes were starting to compound into larger, more complex problems. Martin, still outwardly charming, began to feel the pressure in subtle ways. A missed opportunity here, a misjudged conversation there, moments that had seemed harmless months ago now hinted at ripple effects he hadn't considered. Each choice mattered more than ever, and the audience begins to sense a sense of fragility in a man who had always seemed untouchable. The tension that had been building quietly now feels more urgent, more real. Sinatra's role in all this remained consistent, a careful observer, quietly worried, noting the consequences as they appeared. He had seen the early warning signs, the small dominoes falling, and understood the unfolding impact better than anyone. While he could not undo what had been ignored, his watchful presence provided a contrast. One man cautious and aware, the other seemingly untouchable but unknowingly vulnerable. The irony of the situation deepens. The public applauded, unaware that behind the smiles, a quiet storm was gathering. Friends and associates tried to help, but the slow accumulation of overlooked signs meant that even good intentions sometimes fell short. The charm that made Martin beloved was no longer enough to shield him from the subtle effects of misjudgment, and even minor errors began to show consequences that could not be ignored. Even in the brightest spotlight, shadows can grow unnoticed, quietly shaping what comes next. The slow burn of tension is crucial here. Instead of a sudden dramatic event, the audience feels a creeping sense of inevitability. Each backstage moment, each small choice, each trusting gesture adds weight. The story emphasizes that the cost of ignored advice and unseen betrayal does not always hit all at once. It grows quietly, invisibly, until it is undeniable. The story moves now from tension into reflection. On stage, the lights still shine, music still plays, and the world applauds. But the quiet moments, the backstage rooms, the empty chairs, the contracts and letters, tell a different story. The choices that were ignored, the subtle betrayal that went unnoticed at the time, and the slow accumulation of private struggles have left a mark. It is a mark of human vulnerability, of the consequences of trust and inattention, and of the hidden cost of charm and fame. The audience is invited to reflect rather than judge. There is empathy for Martin, who unknowingly trusted the wrong people, and for Sinatra, who foresaw the dangers but could not prevent them. The emotional tension lingers, a bittersweet sense of admiration mixed with sadness, a recognition that even legends are human and fallible. The story does not reveal every detail, leaving some questions unresolved. How much did Martin truly understand? Could the private consequences have been avoided? Sometimes the brightest stars hide the heaviest burdens, and the world applauds without ever seeing them. Visually, this section uses slow, cinematic cues to deepen the reflection. Black and white photos of Martin and Sinatra together fade into empty dressing rooms. Slow zooms on a microphone, sheet music, or backstage pass suggest both legacy and absence. Grainy vintage film textures and soft, melancholic music reinforce the bittersweet tone. The audience is left with a sense of nostalgia, loss, and quiet wonder at the complexity of human relationships and choices. The ending does not offer resolution. It does not tie up every open loop. Instead, it leaves subtle ambiguity to provoke thought and discussion. Viewers are encouraged to consider the delicate balance between charm and caution, trust and oversight, public image and private consequence. The reflection is slow, emotional, and cinematic, leaving the audience with the weight of what could have been and the haunting question: how many warnings go unnoticed before it's too late? By the end of this final act, the story comes full circle. The public world of fame and applause contrasts sharply with the private world of choices, betrayal, and quiet consequences. The tension resolves into reflection rather than drama, giving viewers a slow, satisfying emotional takeaway while keeping the mystery and ambiguity alive.